Ah, the power of healing and tranquility. There's nothing quite like the energy of crystals.
Here we go again. Questos. Lee, it's crystals for heaven's sake.
Well, long-term listeners of Mindcake will know that if you want the best crystals,
Or crystals.
then look no further than the wonderful Kay at KC Holistics. She is a qualified Reiki and crystal healer, and let me tell you, her Reiki charged crystals are something special.
Ah, but wait. It's not just crystals. She has beautiful bracelets, home decor, and even sun catchers. Perfect gifts for anyone who needs a bit of zen in their life this Christmas.
Exactly, Paul. Hit us with some holistic housekeeping, please.
Of course. Be sure to check out all of Kay's products and upcoming events at kcholistics.co.uk.
And enjoy that healing feeling.
Let's start a podcast about our mental health for no good reason why. Let's call it Mind Cake.
Hello, my lovely cakers, and welcome to another episode of Mind Cake. Mind Cake? With me, Lee Crompton. Just me. Paul is polar expressing. I am, however, fresh back from my birthday weekend in Knutsford. I had a fantastic time. Had a lovely birthday on the Friday. Saw Cara, Spirit Guide Cara. Saw Cousin Carrie, Cosmic Cousin Carrie. Yes, just enjoyed the company of my friends. And so, yes, I got back yesterday. And here I am for your pleasure, recording a quick intro to this week's guest, I've been looking forward to dropping this for a long time, the amazing Howard Scott Warshaw. I'm not going to give him any introduction because he does it so well himself. He has an extraordinary tale. So without further ado, let's get into my chat with the wonderful Howard Scott Warshaw. Today, I'm very excited because on Mind Cake today, we are joined by legendary video game designer, creator of Yars' Revenge, Indiana Jones, and the infamous E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial game for the Atari, Howard Scott Warshaw. How are you?
I'm well, Lee. Thank you. Really appreciate being here. As soon as I got a chance to find out I had an opportunity to be on the Mind Cake, I thought, I'll have a slice.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we started to talk about cake. The first few episodes, we did talk a lot about cake, and that has fallen by the wayside. And I presume if it's a mental health podcast, that's probably not a bad thing.
Well, maybe you can have your cake and eat it.
You can have your cake and eat it. Well, listen, what you have transitioned into the world of psychotherapy.
I have indeed.
However, how you got there, I think we should start with your backstory. And as I said a moment ago when we were just chatting, having recently watched the Atari Game Over documentary, I'm not entirely sure where to start. So I suppose, because the thing is as well, is like, because I grew up, I must admit, I don't hold this against me, but I was a Commodore 64 guy. So I'm interested to know what drew you to the video game industry initially, and how did you land the job with Atari? Because presumably, programmer or whatever your title wasn't really a job then.
No, there was no such thing as video game programmer as a job title at then. There were people who were doing it, but this was the dawning of a new medium.
Yeah.
The dawning of interactive entertainment. And that was huge and that was awesome. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to it. But initially, I wanted to go to Atari simply because of the type of technical work they do and the environment. So, and I only heard about it. It never occurred to me to work at Atari. That thought never entered my mind.
Oh.
I was working at Hewlett Packard.
Right.
I was, a regular software engineer, bored out of my mind because Hewlett Packard was big mainstream kind of stuff. And I liked obscure microprocessor applications, which in the late 70s were brand new and not many people knew about it. And I heard that Atari was doing what's called real-time microprocessor applications. That's what a video game is.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that sounds interesting to work on. And I was so bored, I was acting out a lot at Hewlett Packard. I was kind of a zoo case at
So
Hewlett Packard
what age are you at this point?
I'm 22 when I first arrived at Hewlett Packard with my master's degree and all this stuff. And I'm ready to go and be an adult and pretend, here we go. And I was bored out of my mind. And by 23, I thought, I can't keep doing this. I cannot keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I was acting out a lot. And one of my friends at work came and told me, I tell my wife stories about you. They used to tell Howard stories at Hewlett Packard. And he said, she says that's what it sounds like all the time where she works. I said, oh, where's that? And he said, Atari. And that was the first time it ever occurred to me that Atari was a place you could go and work. And so I thought, okay. And I went there and I talked my way into an interview, went through a whole interview cycle. And I thought, this is cool. And they make games. I mean, I wanted to do the kind of tech they do. I wanted to have a more wild environment where I would feel more normal.
Yeah.
And they make games. I like games, but games were like the third thing. Most people there who were diehard gamers, I like games, but that was like the third on my list. And we went, and everything seemed to work great. And there was a real rapport, and I was really excited. And then they rejected me. Right. They wouldn't hire me.
Really?
And this became a very funny story. I asked, why don't you want to hire me? They said, we're afraid you're a little too straight.
Oh, really?
For this environment. And that over time became a great joke. It became a very ironic, funny thing about it, because I also became one of the wildest characters at Atari. But the thing is, I didn't get that at first. When I first showed up at Atari to interview, I put on my professional demeanor. I was a standard, very professional appearance. I thought, it's a job interview, I want to be serious.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that would make it less likely that I would get the job in this case. And by being myself, being my real wacky self, would have made a much stronger job interview.
Sure.
So when they rejected me, I did not accept. I just pushed back. I said, wait a second, we're missing a great job match here. And I just wore him down. And eventually they gave me a chance. And the rest is literally history.
Am I right in saying, I think it's in the documentary, that there's a particular thing that you took in with you on your first day at Atari?
I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Also, I want to mention that I did write a book about all my experiences and everything that went on at Atari in my life at large, called Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. It's a ebook, paperback, audio book. I narrated the audiobook myself.
Oh, really? Okay.
And in this book, you will hear the following story.
Okay.
True story. The first day I went into work at Atari, because of what I'd gone through at the interviews and made some real connection with some people, I was very aware that marijuana was something that was very significant in the workplace at Atari. It wasn't mandatory, but it was a big resume item. Let's put it that way. And so I rolled up a joint and brought one in that day. I thought, just in case, you want to be a cordial colleague, and I had no problem joining in the fun. And so I was carrying this joint around throughout the day, and it was a wild day. It was a lot of interesting things going on. I was trying to read a lot and figure out and get my bearings there. And then towards the end of the day, I'm sitting in the office I was assigned to, and one of the office mates comes blowing in, and he slams the door behind him. And he looks at me and he says, I'm going to smoke a joint right now. So if you don't want to be around this, you need to get out of here. And I thought, that's the wackiest thing I've ever heard on my first day at work.
First day at work, yeah.
And so I pulled out my joint at this point. I figured this is obviously the time.
This is the moment.
So I pulled out my joint and I said, I brought a joint. I'll be happy to share with you. And he looks at me and he pulls out a little plastic baggie and pops it out. And it is purple and green and smells like skunk. And it's unbelievable. And he looks at me and he says, I'm going to smoke some real stuff here. No offense. And so I thought, okay, this guy's a pot snob. That's interesting. And so we went ahead and smoked his stuff. And I thought, holy crap, this guy is not just a snob. He's a connoisseur. I realized his stash was so much better than mine that I realized if I was going to make it at Atari, I was going to have to up my game on every level. First day.
That was your first day. Well, it's almost that Crocodile Dundee moment. That's not a knife. Yeah, welcome to the real stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly right, and that's where it was.
Brilliant. Can you walk us through the creative process behind developing, let's say, Yar's Revenge, which became, am I right in saying, one of Atari's best-selling games? I'm interested because I work in construction, but I write scripts, and I'm interested to know how you. Well, we'll come on to ET, but when you're supposed to, certainly when you've got a short amount of time to do something, but how do you start? Is it the story? Is it the programming? Is it the visuals? What does that look like?
Well, the creative process is something I've spent a lot of time in my life studying, engaging in, trying to perfect. So it's nice. It's lovely that you asked me about this. This is something I really enjoyed talking about.
Cool.
So the creative process for Yar's Revenge specifically, for my first game, is interesting because in order to get into Atari, right, I said they had rejected me and I finally wore them down. And basically what I agreed was to take a 20% cut in pay and go on probation for 6 months so that I could prove myself. And within the first few days of my being there, they assigned me a game that was a Star Castle. It was a coin op that they wanted converted to the 2600. And so you'd think, well, if I'm on probation and all this, the first thing I need to do is just do the best job I can at doing whatever it is they're giving. But that's not me. Okay. I don't believe in a thing called malicious obedience. Malicious obedience is when you know something is going to be a disaster, but you do it anyway just to prove to somebody they were wrong. And I don't believe that. So I looked over the game. I didn't know everything, but I read the manual. I understood the hardware enough to know that this game was going to suck. This game would absolutely suck on the 2600. And there was no way I was going to allow my first game to suck. So what I did was I prepared an alternate design. And I went to the hiring manager, the guy who hired me, who gave me a break, who told me I'm on probation. I said, this assignment you gave me, I don't want to do it. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And he's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, I think it's going to suck. I did lay it. I said, here's why I think. And he understood the machine enough. And I said, but here's something I think would work better. This had nothing to do with Yar's Revenge at this point. This is purely my intuitive approach to what I think would make an interesting visual screen experience. That's where I'm starting. And he, to his credit, said, okay, go for it. So we blew off the coin op and I got to start working on my first game. Talk about a sink or swim situation.
Yeah, definitely.
I tell him right off the bat, this thing you said that's going to make me determine whether I can be here or not, I'm not going to do that. I want to do something entirely else. But with the 2600, the straightforward stuff to do is something like combat, where you have just two tanks and each of them shoots one missile at the other, one at a time, and you run around a course play field. That's what the machine is designed to do. That's not what the machine is capable of doing, but that's what it was designed to do. The real creative challenge on the 2600 is not to just take a few simple elements and try to make a new game out of that. The real creative challenge, and this was just clear to me right at the start, the real creative challenge is to find something new you can do in the corners, in the dark spots, in the web, the cobwebbed corners of that machine, because that machine was primitive, but it was wide open. And you could use it and you could abuse it. And you could do weird things. So there's this weird hybrid between super anal, intimate technical detail and outrageous creative possibility construction. And that's where a video game on the 2600 lives. You need someone, what they used to say is you need someone who's both anal and silly. You need someone who's enough of a nerd to really get into the bit by bit details of that chip. And at the same time, be wacky and performer and artistic enough to be able to turn some of those bits and bytes into an interesting experience. And so that's because that's me. That's where I was coming from. I'm a nerd infused with ham. That would be a good description of me. And so my thing was to go, and I love puzzles. I love solving problems. I love finding new ways to do things. That's just something that turns me on. So when I started to do things with the 2600, the first thing I did was I looked for cool stuff to do, because what I wanted was to put something on the screen that people could not walk by. They would have to go, whoa, what's that? And some of the first things I put on the screen did just that. And people would come up to me and they'd go, wow, that's cool. What's that? And they're like, this new guy, what the hell? You know, it's like, and they go, that's cool. And I go, yeah, cool. You know, and they go, what does it do? And I said, I don't know yet. It's just because I wanted to put some cool things on the screen. I had a vague idea of, you know, what you want to do. And then over time, see, my feeling is you create capacity, you create capability, and then you figure out what to do with it. Now, that's one take on the creative process, which was your question, right? I mean, a lot of people in the creative process pick a goal, and then all their focus is how do we get there? In an early stage creative process, if you already have a really clear target, that you have to do that.
Yeah.
But if your goal is just to create something new, which at the dawning of a new medium, nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows what you can do. So what's your job? What's your job description? What are you trying to do? My job description is that I get up and I go to work, and on a good day when I leave work, there is something now that exists that did not exist when I got up. And that's a cool job description for me. I love that. So that's where I start. So instead of having a goal like a specific game design and just try to work towards that, what I'm thinking is first you expand your horizons, and then you see where that takes you. What does that suggest to you? Like some people in writing, a lot of writers, when you're writing fiction, what they say is you don't focus all on the story. Focus on the characters, develop the characters, and after a while, the characters will tell you where the story goes. It's a similar kind of thinking. And so I wanted to create new capabilities and just cool stuff. Like I said, you put me in a visual medium, and the first thing I want to do is something that's visually exciting and intense. A lot of people, when they start development, they put a square and a dot, and they just start moving those around to test gameplay. And for me, I don't want to stare at a square and a dot. I want something more interesting just to keep me engaged while I'm sitting there working. So I put this stuff up, and I'm getting cool feedback, and people love it, but I still haven't really solved the question of what the hell do I do with it? And in point of fact, the first actual playable game version that I had a horrible controller scheme, and there was a number of things. And basically, I was sitting on a game that looked cool but sucked. And I thought, oh God, I didn't want to do a game that sucks, and now my game sucks. And that was a very depressing moment.
But it looks nice
at the time. It sure looks good. Oh baby. You know? And so now I'm a victim of my own avarice. And what am I going to do? But I consulted some people, made a few tweaks, and I made a major gameplay change because of some of the tweaks I had to make. Because as I said, as I eliminated problems, things that didn't work. You know, there's an old Sherlock Holmes quote, I believe, which is actually an Arthur Conan Doyle quote, I guess. Which is, after eliminating the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Right? And so I started removing the things that didn't work. And then I had problems to fix, right? Because the things that I removed still had to be there. They didn't work the way I had them implemented. And what I did was take some things off the controller, because I didn't have the controller space for them anymore. And I wrapped them into the gameplay. And that turned out to be a wonderful game design thing to do. If you want to do something in a game, make it a behavioral exercise opposed to a button push, and people will be more compelled. It makes for more compelling gameplay. And I made those tweaks, and then suddenly people loved the game. I mean, it wasn't just, oh, that's better. It's like, you're like, oh my God. And I thought, holy crap, this is amazing. And that transition from sucking to being fabulous and still looking good, you know, it was like, and then suddenly, and now at this point, there's still no such thing as Yar's Revenge. Right. So the thing I want to emphasize is that the creative process with this game was all about expanding what was possible on the machine first, finding things you could potentially do, finding new ways to do them. And because first and foremost, I'm making a game. I want to make a game that's fun to play.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to that point, then you start the branding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what Yar's Revenge is, a branding that sits on top of just the gameplay. And there's another thing I discuss in the book. There's kind of a fun discussion about the idea of, does branding make a difference? Does what you call a game or how you define the characters in a game, does that really make any difference to the gameplay? And I give a really great example of a very simple gameplay and 3 different interpretations.
Okay.
You know, one of them which would villainize the game, one of which makes the game super heroic, and one where it's just the gameplay. And it's a fun contrast, I think. But for the creative point, it's just, if you're making a video game, my feeling is what you need is a fun game. And then you put a story on top of it. If you're doing a license, like when I did Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T., there's not much question about the branding, right? We know where that's going. But I prefer original games. And in an original game, the branding is a big part also. So typically we did the game, then we turn it over to marketing and they do their thing. They name the game and they do the box art and they put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel you're a solid creative person, you tend to have boundary issues and control issues. Okay, let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so the boundary issue part is great because that's what encourages, that's people with boundary issues, the kind who don't get stuck in typical ways of thinking and do find new ways of approaching things and new applications for old things. So that part comes in really handy. The control issue thing isn't necessarily as fun for other people in a lot of ways. So when it came time to name the game and I found out from marketing, well, they're going to go name the game, I thought to myself, I don't think these people in marketing are really that creative. This is my first game. I feel like I finally got to a good game. Mm-hmm. I need to make it great. I need to be involved in every part of it.
Yeah.
So I asked the marketing rep, look, can I submit a branding and a naming for the game? And he goes, sure. He goes, but you don't have much time. I said, okay. This is like in the afternoon one day. I said, come back tomorrow morning. I'll have something for you. And he's like, okay, no problem. I said, will that be too late? He goes, no, that'll be fine. Okay, cool. So he takes off. I sit around and I go through this whole process of what am I going to do? How am I going to name it? I always remember the story of how the word quiz came into existence.
Okay.
Right, which was in London, I think. It's a good story, but it's just when you try to create a new word, everything you come up with sounds stupid. To me, it doesn't sound right. And eventually I gave up the idea. But one of my bucket list items has always been to add a word to the English language. For some reason, I always thought that would be a super cool thing to do. And I realized that if this game goes on and becomes really popular, like Pac-Man has, this is my chance to add a word, whatever the character name is. If that becomes a known character, I will have added a word to common parlance. And how cool would that be? So I thought, instead of just making up a name, I thought, let me use algorithms like a good programmer, come up with a name. And I thought, what's something that's just undeniably Atari, that's got a lot of status and power? And I thought, well, Ray Kazar is the CEO. Right. So that's a pretty significant term. Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, let's do a cipher, right? So we'll spell it backwards. Ray spelled backwards is Yar. And I thought, Yar, that's good. That's got sci-fi kind of a ring to it. And Kazar backwards, Razak, I've got Z's, I've got Y's. If you have X, Y's, and Z's, you're in sci-fi. That's the way I always think of it. And so I thought, there's Yars and there's this Razak solar system. And I started to build this thing. And then I thought to myself, there's an old saying that, you can steal more money with a gun in a briefcase than you can with just a briefcase.
Yeah.
And I thought I could, if I had a story, a whole backstory, in addition to just the name of the game, wouldn't that be a stronger submission? Yeah. So I sat down and I worked all night. And I just wrote a 12-page story called The Yarian Revenge of Razak 4. And I thought, because revenge is a great title word, because who doesn't want revenge?
Yeah.
And I've got the character name with Yar. So I'm liking this. So I wrote a whole story and I put it all together. And then I had the people come type it up in the morning. And then the mid-morning, here comes the guy from marketing. Boom. I give him the whole submission and he takes off. Later that afternoon, I love this story. So later that afternoon, he comes back because this was my marketing plan to outmarket marketing.
Outmarket the marketers, yeah.
Exactly. I look at it as I'm marketing my proposal to marketing. So he comes back that afternoon. I said, "Is it in?" I said, "Is my proposal?" He goes, "Yeah, it's submitted. It's in. It's under consideration." I said, "Okay, cool." I said, I'd like to tell you a secret." I said, "but I don't want this to influence the naming. So you got to promise me you'll keep this to yourself." He goes, "Okay, I promise, no problem." So I said, "Okay, you know that Yar thing?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Spell that backwards. What's that?" He goes, "Yar, Ray." I go, "Right, and Razak, right? What's that?" And he thinks about it. He goes, "Kazar." And he goes, "Ray Kazar. Ray Kazar. Does Ray know about this?" And I said, "Well, of course Ray knows about it. I wouldn't do anything like this without Ray's knowledge. But that's why I don't want you to tell me, because I don't want it to unduly influence the decision making. Okay, because that wouldn't be fair." And he's like, "Okay." So I swear him to secrecy twice more, and then he goes on his way. At this point, I know three things for sure. One, I know he is going to run right back to marketing and tell everyone. No doubt in my mind. Two, nobody in marketing has the balls to go and talk to Ray Kazar about this.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because three, I totally pulled this out of my ass. Ray Kazar knows nothing about this. And so he goes off, that's it. And then late the next day, he comes by, he goes, "Guess what, Howard?" He goes, "We're going to go with Yar's Revenge." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic." And I was tempted to say to him, "You didn't tell anybody, did you?" But I just, I didn't want to push it that far.
No. Yeah, quit when you're ahead.
But I just figured, wow, I made it.
That's
I
great.
won.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize was I had invented the backstory in video gaming. That was the first time a video game actually had a backstory. And the whole Yar's Revenge lore, and now there's the Yarniverse, and there's things potentially expanding that whole concept. But I had done the first real branding and original story creation and invented the backstory. Yar's Revenge had a lot of firsts. I mean, it was first full screen explosion, first game with pause mode. There was a lot of very innovative things that I did. It was the first 2600 game with pause mode. The paradigm for home games was based on coin-op games, right? Whenever there's a new medium, the first thing people do is they copy the old medium. Because they don't know what to do with the new medium yet. It's new. So we always copy the successes of the old medium. So coin-op games was a new medium, but home games was it was actually a slightly different medium. And so with home games, you don't, in coin-op games, you're never going to have a pause mode because you need people to keep dropping quarters. That's your revenue.
Yeah.
With home games, you pay one bag of quarters and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. So the model, the economics of it is different. I always felt you can ask more in terms of learning curve with a home game, because people have already bought it. They're more committed to try and figure out what's going on with the game and get value out of it. But if you can make a game a little more complex, you can make a better game, a game that's deeper with better legs. And so that easy to learn, tough to master, I was more like, well, maybe a little challenging to learn, but tough to master. And get a deeper game. And in some ways that worked, in some ways it didn't. But that was the thing, is I am a boundary breaker. I always want to do things in the way you don't expect. Whenever you ask me for something, I'm going to give you the thing that could be an accurate misinterpretation of what you said, just to make the point that, you weren't really being that specific.
You weren't 100% clear. Yeah.
Now there's a name for that. It's called being a dick at times. But it's something that computer programmers do. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no. I was just thinking of a time that I was a dick when I was at school, and we had the English teacher used to write 3 titles on the. I mean, I must have been, I don't know, 8 or 10, and used to write 3 titles on the board, and you could pick one and write a story about it, but they were always like really shit. So it would be like the biggest strawberry, the white fang, and so I put whatever it was, these stupid inane titles. I've gone, right, I've taken that and taken it completely out of context, and that was the name of the pub where this uncle worked in, and then the kids went to visit their uncle in this remote country pub, but the only connection between the title was the name of the pub. And I remember I got absolutely lambasted for it because, well, you didn't write a story about the grey wolf, you wrote a story about a pub. And I remember, yeah, you talk about crushing people's creativity. I think I got the lowest marks ever out the class because you've done something that you're not supposed to have done. You changed the brief.
It's the surest sign of what I call a little lord. People who want to give you direction and give you no latitude. What are they afraid they're going to discover something? I mean, frequently what it is they're afraid someone is going to exceed them in some ways. And instead of having expanded and found something positive, which is what a creative person would celebrate, they're a little too much about wanting to control the world and having recognition of their own as opposed to earning it. And I, as you might guess, I don't do very well with those sorts of people.
Well, listen, Howard, I'm conscious we're 34 minutes in and I've got loads more to talk to you about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to monopolize the interview.
No. No, I meant more.
I'm kidding. Go ahead.
More stories from me. But so after Yar's Revenge, and this is where we start to get to the crux of things, you did E.T.
I did. Well, after that, I did Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Sorry.
And then I did E.T.,
which was also another huge hit. And am I right in saying that these things normally take 5 or 6 months to develop?
At least. Well, Yar's took 7 months. Raiders of the Lost Ark took 10 months.
Okay, and then so somebody comes to you and says, "We need ET," and you've got how many weeks to do it in?
5 weeks, not months. 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
No one had ever done a game in less than 4 or 5 months, I think, at the absolute tops. And they wanted a game, not just a game, but the biggest license purchase in history. And they were going to give it 5 weeks. So as you might well imagine, there's quite a bit in my book about that too.
I can imagine.
About the whole ET fiasco. But it was an interesting thing because I did Yar's and that was extremely successful. And then I did Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was the first movie to game conversion.
Okay.
I did that, and that worked so well for Steven Spielberg that he specifically had asked for me to do the ET game. And so the CEO, Ray Kazar, that's the very beginning of my book, is the phone call from Ray Kazar when I'm sitting in my office just towards the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark saying, "Hey, we need ET in 5 weeks. Can you do it?" And I told him, absolutely, I can do it, provided we reach the right arrangement. And it was, you know, I don't know what exactly I was full of, but whatever it was, I was overflowing with it at that point. Because I truly believed I could do it. And because I needed a challenge. After having done those two, like I did Yar's, and that was really good, which made me very, very nervous. Because now, if you never get a hit, oh, well, it didn't happen for me. But if you have a hit, suddenly the only thing I hear in my head is one hit wonder. Is that all you've got? Because when you get a hit, you attract enough attention that people want to know if you can do anything else. And if you can, in my mind, there was always something more pathetic about the one hit wonder than somebody who never did anything. There was just something weird about that. Somebody had one idea and that worked.
That was it. And then I'm out of ideas. Yeah,
exactly.
I've had my one.
So that was my fear. And then I did Raiders, and that was very well accepted, and that was a success. And I thought, okay, now I'm 2 for 2. Now I can't afford to miss because with me, there's always something to worry about. So it's like, so what am I going to do? I need a challenge. I need a real challenge. I was just thinking in my mind, I need a real challenge. And then I get this phone call. Can you do this game in 5 weeks? And there was a part of me that just said, I absolutely have to do this. I have to do this.
Am I right in saying they wanted it out by Christmas? So that was the issue, wasn't it?
Right. The issue was, so this is July 27th. I remember it because this is 3 days before my 25th birthday.
Okay.
I'll never forget this stuff. That was July 27th in the afternoon. I got a call from Ray Kazar. Can you do it? This was a Tuesday. I said, absolutely, I can do it. He says, okay, great. He goes, Thursday morning, 8 a.m., there will be a Learjet at San Jose Airport. Be on it. It's going to take you down to Steven Spielberg, where you're going to present the design for the game.
Right.
So not only do I have to do the game in 5 weeks, I have 36 hours
The presentation
to prepare the entire design and a presentation. I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to do the game in 5 weeks, you better not take much more than that to do the design. But that's not a lot of time to design a game. So I went through it. I'm very clear on all this in the book about the whole, people go, what were you thinking when you made that game? I tell them, this is what I was thinking. This is the whole explanation. Because there is a very elaborate and clear line of thought that I went through to arrive at a design. Because if you're gonna try and program a game that usually takes 6 months in 5 weeks, you're gonna fail. That's not gonna work. No one is gonna do 6 months worth of work in 5 weeks. Just not gonna happen. So what you need to do, it's not a programming problem. It's a design problem. What you need to do is, instead of trying to take a 6-month thing and squeeze it into 5 weeks, you've got to take something you can do in 5 weeks and produce that at the highest level of quality you can. And that's what I did. So I tried to design a game that I felt would still be a full, substantial game, but the components of it could be done in a short period of time. And I used that kind of analytical thinking to create the design for it. And once I had the design stipulated, I just executed the design, which I planned to be able to be done in 5 weeks. And so, most creative endeavors are what I would call a voyage of discovery, right? What it is that if you take the initial design of something, especially successful products, if you go through history, you look at some major successful products, and you look at the original design and blueprint, and you look at the final product, you will see there's a vast difference. And the difference is it got better. As you go along, you learn things, you discover things, you find where the blind alleys are, and you do better. You improve and update the design as you go. So one of the biggest problems with ET, and it's kind of a funny way to think about it, one of the biggest problems with ET was that I delivered 100% of the initial design.
Oh, really?
Right? And, yes, so you wouldn't think, how'd the project go? Well, I delivered 100% of my initial design. Oh, that's too bad. That's a bummer. But what it means is there was no room for rumination and updates and improvement of the design. There was no room for learning curve. It was just a sprint marathon, and it was brutal. But I did deliver it. It passed quality assurance, and I did meet that standard. I put a game out. And even after all the returns, ET still sold like over 1.5 million copies. In fact, all 3 of my games that were released at Atari were million sellers. I think I'm the only programmer who can make the claim, who did more than one game, who can say that every game they released was a million seller.
Wow.
So I got that going for me.
You got that going. Steven Spielberg said that himself that he loved the game.
He did. He loved that game. He got paid $22 million to love that game, I got to say. So I could understand him really enjoying it.
He really loved it. Yeah. But I mean, let's not beat about the bush. I mean, I watched the documentary, and obviously it's renowned as, well, on a lot of websites, the worst
video game of all time. You don't have to be shy about it. I'm not shy about it. Believe me. In fact, the truth is, I prefer when people recognize. Do I believe it's the worst game of all time? Absolutely not. And many people will tell you there are far worse games than ET. But I do everything I can to preserve ET's reputation as the worst game of all time. Because Yar's Revenge is frequently hailed as one of the best games of all time. So as long as ET's the worst, I have the greatest range of any designer in history, and I'll take that.
Absolutely. That is a great way to look at it. Switching then from mental health, and I suppose you're going to have to help me out here a bit, from firstly, how was your mental health during that 5-week period when you're, I imagine under a lot of huge pressure to get the game out?
Great question.
And then your mental health.
Great question.
when the game was received. I mean, there's two bites of the cherry there. I mean, yeah, you fill in the gaps.
This is major subject matter for Once Upon Atari. Absolutely, my book is that you wouldn't know what to talk to me, but I'm a pretty easygoing, fun guy, generally.
Yeah, I kind of get that vibe.
And anybody who knows me will recognize the gravity of this statement, is that I was losing my sense of humor by the end of this thing. And I was snapping at people occasionally, which is something I never do. Because I had just finished a 10-month slog on Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was a really difficult project to pull off. And at the end, this was right on the heel. So after a 10-month thing with no break, where I should have taken a vacation and gotten a break, I capped off a 10-month real, like death march with another 5-week insanity.
Yeah.
And it did gradually drive me crazy. Because the need that I had to make this work, to make this happen, and the idea that I knew I had a development system moved into my home so that I would never be more than 2 minutes away from when something hit me to be able to actually enter it into the game. So I was working at home. I was working at work, but only occasionally. I began the whole work from home thing.
Yeah, there's another tick in the box. Yeah. That wasn't a thing.
No, it wasn't. And there's no internet, so strictly sneaker net, right? So every once in a while, once or twice a week, I would go into the office to update the copy of the game there to get a fresh listing so I could be reviewing the code.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's not as if you could just.
Yeah, very primitive stuff. But the only time that it would take me more than a minute or two to go do something in the game if I needed to, was when I was literally driving between work and home, which was the only thing that I did. There were people who were assigned to make sure I was eating, taking occasional shower, like trying to make sure I wasn't completely pile driving myself into the ground.
Yeah.
Almost died twice. There were 2 times I almost died driving back and forth because I was programming in my head instead of watching traffic lights. And I very nearly had a couple of major accidents that might have delayed the project. So
we couldn't have that.
It was like, no, can't have that. And it's like, it was so intense and I was so committed. I think it was the hardest 5 weeks I have ever worked in my life. Just brutal. And I was already a little exhausted after Raiders. And then after that, I was burnt out. I mean, I was so burnt out and so backwards in my head and already starting to think so much about, oh my God, what am I going to do next? Because once I accomplished ET and we hadn't had any negative feedback, because also, back then you don't drop the game and get, a couple of thousand opinions in the first few hours.
Yeah.
This was going to be months before it was going to be able to hit shelves and people were going to be able to play it. So it was a huge success for quite a while. Yeah. So I got to finish the game. I got to experience it as a dramatic success. The first thing Atari did was they sent me to Hawaii for 2 weeks, all expenses paid, as like a thank you for the game. In Hawaii, I kept calling back into the office. Hey, what's going on? What's happening? I was so antsy to get back. Yeah. I left Hawaii early. I couldn't relax in paradise, basically. I was that wired after that. And when I got back, I couldn't really do anything effectively in the office either. I was just incredibly burnt out. And it took me a couple of months at least to actually recover from having done that game. To recover mostly mentally and spiritually, to get my spirit back. It did take a little while. It was intense. It was one of the most profound drops I've ever experienced.
I don't want to liken it to sort of an Olympic athlete, but you hear about these Olympic athletes who've been training and training and training for the Olympics, and then they get to the Olympics and they win the gold medal, and then, what do I do now? You've worked and worked and worked. You've got the game out in 5 weeks. It's ET, the biggest film. It's Steven Spielberg. Oh, oh, you want me to sit quietly on a beach now in Hawaii and do nothing? It's like, what do you do
Not
next?
bloody likely.
How did you feel then? Or how long was it until you got to the reviews? And then how did that affect you?
It's interesting because everybody thinks, oh my God, you must feel very self-conscious or down or off about having made the worst video game. If I would have finished the game and everybody would have, oh, we hate it, this sucks, this is horrible.
Mm.
I don't know how that would have gone. What happened was I finished the game September 1st.
Yeah.
And everybody was cheering. I mean, literally cheering. Everybody at Atari was cheering. We did it. We made it. We got this game out. Then it went out, and I, sort of tried to decrispify for a couple of months. And so here's October and November. And now November is starting to hit stores and it's getting exciting.
Yeah.
And then in the beginning of December, I get to attend the London premiere of E.T., where I sit 3 rows in front of Lady Di and Prince Charles and Steven Spielberg.
Okay.
So they got to watch me watch the movie. I thought that was fabulous. And there's a lot of hoopla. And then the Billboard magazine's ratings come out, and both Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. are in the top 10 of video game sales. So I have 2 of the top 10 games on the list at the same time.
Yeah.
I am not feeling like a failure at this point. I am smoking big cigars, as they say. This feels really good. And I'm also trying to really get into my next project and trying to come up with another game. And I'm feeling the pressure of that. And I'm kind of focused on that. Because once you're done with the game goes out and it's nice. But also, there's no web, there's no internet. So there's no trolls running around, commenting on everything. People don't know yet. And it's the big Christmas present, which means people are buying it, but they're not playing it yet. They're saving it for the Christmas stocking.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't much feedback at all. There isn't much feedback until we get into January and February.
Mm-hmm.
So far, it's been a massive success. I've had nothing but positive feedback. Everything has been great. Now, we're 6 months, 7 months past having finished the project for me. I've had all positive feedback. Now, starting to see things like people are coming up to me in the hallway from marketing, and they're saying things like, "Hey, Howard, we don't blame you." And I'm like, cool. I'm not being blamed. I have no idea what they're talking about, not blaming me. And they go, yeah, you really came through for us. We're behind you. This is all good. And I'm thinking, like, what the hell are they talking about?
Uh-huh.
And then it starts to filter back that, okay, now there's a lot of returns. People aren't liking the game. There's a lot of frustration with the game. The ET thing's a problem. But also, since it is still pre-internet, this whole idea that it has destroyed the video game industry, that doesn't exist yet. It's going to be 10 years before you hear anything like that.
Yeah.
All we're hearing is, oh my God, there's a lot of returns. The product isn't going as well as we'd hoped, and it's not working. It's just not working well. Mm-hmm. Okay, my head's already in the next projects and stuff. So this stuff is sort of very peripheral. And like I said, there's no constant, I'm not getting trolled at every corner. So, that's not a big deal. And then things start falling apart at Atari, which, ET aside, that's a much bigger deal because this fabulous parade I've been in is getting rained on. Mm-hmm. And that was sad. Mm-hmm. That was sad. Yeah. And this led to the end of my time at Atari in '84, which is truly what I've had 3 great depressions. If you don't think of high school, which was one incredible depression, I've had 3 major depressions in my life.
Uh-huh.
And this was one of them was just before I went to Atari, when I was at Hewlett Packard, and I recognized that my life that I had constructed that was all on target and going right down for a place I wanted to be totally wasn't working, and I didn't know what to do. And I was pretty depressed then. Mm-hmm. The day I left Atari, I spent some time really depressed then. That was tough.
Yeah.
And the last, and what I think will probably ultimately be the last depression in my life, was over a decade ago, just before I decided to become a therapist, appropriately enough.
Yeah.
It was, I was sort of at a turnstile in my life, because there's no crossroads with me. There's lots of different avenues potentially. And a roundabout would probably be more appropriate. And and I had to pick a new direction. I didn't know what to do because I didn't see a possibility that was there. And then suddenly one presented itself. And the next thing you know, I'm a psychotherapist.
Mm-hmm.
And that was huge. That was huge for me because I became way healthier mentally becoming a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
The work that I had to do to become a therapist, because I wanted to be a good therapist. If you're going to be a good therapist, one thing you really have to do is deal with your own bullshit, right? Because a therapist who has never done that is only going to spread their bullshit. And that's not good therapy, in my opinion. And I never wrote this book until I had been a therapist for a while and really was more settled. People have been asking me for a long time to write a book about Atari, about the Atari experience and stuff. And I would always say, no, I don't know how it comes out yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when they finally made the Atari Game Over movie, that was an amazing thing. Because talk about the mental health that I experienced. I've always used humor to deal with a lot of the difficulty or the troubles or anxieties in life. I'm very good at finding the funny side of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always appreciated, like at funerals and stuff like that, but I can't help it. I can always just see, because my feeling is if you can't see the humor in something,
mm-hmm.
what else are you missing?
Yeah.
And my feeling is whatever we approach in life, we should approach it with fully open eyes. I want to consider all the possibilities and choose, not just one or two. A lot of people reduce things to black or white, and that's it. And I have a lot of trouble. I'm a grayscale kind of guy. But in becoming a therapist, I find, because I had the perspective of an engineer, I have the perspective of a business-wise person, because I had a degree in economics before I went into computers.
Mm-hmm.
I had the perspective of a participant, someone who had been at Atari, gone through all this stuff, done it all. But I didn't have the perspective of someone who's over themselves a little bit and has a clearer perspective. And once I got to that place, I felt I was ready to actually do an accounting. And you can see in the book, I go through the different voices in my head of the economist, the engineer, but you can hear the therapist also, as I really am able to understand the complexities of the relationships that were going on inside Atari. And a lot of what was going, the interdepartmental conflict and stuff, people who read this book tell me this is exactly what's happening in their company. So I do a lot of time talking about the acrimony and the just the butting heads between marketing and engineering and management,
mm-hmm.
and the battles for control and all the name calling, the receding into our own silos and the us against them mentality. It's amazing how easily people who are doing great can turn on each other. And that's just as true today as it ever was. And people have found the book very helpful along those lines. That book was Once Upon Atari, I believe, right?
I think it was Once Upon Atari.
Killing an industry. There we go.
So you say that you narrate the audiobook?
I did the audiobook entirely myself.
I'm going to get that. I'm going to get that on Audible.
It sounds just like me.
It sounds just like you. But
mental health was a major piece, so just to finish one thought.
Yeah.
When I saw that movie, I had always used humor. I had always dealt with this thing, the worst game of all time. I'd never really taken it seriously. When I saw the first cut of that movie, which I had trepidations about as well, because I had really given some awesome stuff in the interview, a lot of deep personal stuff in the interviews that I did. And then I found out the director is someone who does mockumentaries and hatchet jobs.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, oh my God, if he wants to do that with me, I gave him some beautiful material.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He did a really credible piece that I was proud to be in. And on the first watching of that, I cried. I literally cried. And what I realized was I felt vindicated. That movie had made me feel vindicated to the point where I could actually acknowledge finally and admit a lot of the pain and the difficulty that I had carried over having been labeled, this horror story in the video game world, when actually having been one of its key innovators for so long. So that was a very significant moment for me.
It's a great documentary.
Thank you for asking.
No, I mean, it's like I said, it's a great documentary, and I was struck with, I think it comes across. I mean, I don't want to say too much about it and the ending or whatever, but you can see by the end that you're really emotional, and it's almost, you can see all of that because you've had all the backstory, and like you say, you've obviously gone into this industry where There's a lot of highs. You're obviously just smoking spliffs and doing your thing. And then obviously, and you could just almost in that moment when you're in the desert, you can see it just coming out. I would recommend anyone who hasn't seen it, watch Atari Game Over. It's definitely worth a watch. Have you
Thank
got
you.
time for
I
another
agree.
couple of questions? Or have you got to go?
I could give you a couple more minutes.
Well, what I was going to say was, well, there's a couple of quick, hopefully quick fire ones. Steven Spielberg, you're obviously best pals with Steven Spielberg. He comes to you and says, Howard, I want to make a biopic of your life. Who plays Howard?
Well, I'd like to think George Clooney, but a lot of people think Rob Reiner's more on target. Honestly, when I have thought about this, I think Andy Samberg, I think, would be a really good choice for it. I also think James Franco.
James Franco
think,
would be great.
I think either of those, I think, would do an awesome job of really delivering the Howard that was there.
Yeah, yeah. This would be a great film. I'd certainly go and watch it. And if there's one,
I would too.
I wish I. If there's one game, either that you did yourself or another game from the past with today's technology, and I'm sure you get asked this a lot, what game would you go back and redo with the gadgets and gizmos that there are now?
Great question. A lot of people know, would I go back and redo ET? And the answer is no, I did ET. That's it. What I would do, in fact, what I'm trying to do, and I'm in the process of doing, is doing, Yar's Revenge has had a lot of variations on it. They're all basically the same gameplay. It's the original Yar's Revenge gameplay. What I've always wanted to do is an actual sequel to Yar's Revenge.
Okay, cool.
And that's what I would do. And I have a design. I'm working with the developer, and we're negotiating with Atari to get this on the schedule.
Fantastic.
But there is an actual Howard Scott Warshaw designed sequel to Yar's Revenge that not only expands the Yar's play universe, but expands the Yar's story universe way beyond where the original story goes. Brilliant. And incorporates Saboteur, another game that I did, and several other things. So there's a huge conceptual expansion to the Yarniverse, as I like to call it. And that's what I would do if I had a chance to do something else with modern tech. And
that's what you are doing by the sounds of it.
Well, there's the proof.
There's the proof. Like one last question. I did have other questions, but it's grand. If you have one, so we discuss, one of the reasons I started the podcast was to sort of discuss certain elements of coping mechanisms or whatever for mental health, because obviously what works for one person, doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. Is there anything that you do when you're in that, if you feel yourself a bit of a funk or whatever, is there anything that you do, whether it's go for a run or cold water therapy, that you find really helps your mood?
For me, I like watching movies. I'm a big movie fan. So that works. What also works is walking my dog.
Yeah.
Every day what I do is I have a creative exercise that I go through. I listen to audiobooks. Audiobooks are a great medium for me. That's why I wanted to narrate my own. I really like them, and it works for me. So what I do is I walk my dog, and I have my phone, and I'm listening to an audiobook, frequently nonfiction, but not always. Yeah. But whenever I listen to something, kind of inspires me. So what I do is while I'm walking, and the dog is cute and goofy, so that's always kind of fun, but I'm getting ideas. And then what I do is I pause the book, and I have, thank God there is speech to text. and I record notes, and I just come up with all these wacky ideas, and I have this file I call ruminations. That's just full of like my little ideas and various themes and directions I want to go, because there's several other books I still want to write. And so what I find when I'm walking with my dog, listening to something and generating ideas, no matter what else is going on, I feel good.
Yeah.
I feel really good about that.
Yeah.
Because I face it when I'm doing, I can also listen to podcasts and news stuff and all the political upheaval and all the crap that's going on. I don't find that super inspiring. But inspiration is like hugely important to me. Yeah. And what I find is that when I listen to people who are interesting people saying what I think are insightful things, that always inspires me to generate insights. And I don't know what works for other people, but for me, walking my dog and recording, what I think are potential insightful ideas, collecting this file. And every once in a while, I go through I'm up to like 200 pages of stuff, right? That I'm correlating and trying to categorize.
Yeah.
And out of that, I'm hoping are going to come another book or two of just some interesting, principled Howard ideas.
Yeah.
And how they might affect people's lives. Because as a therapist, I do want to give people new alternatives to dealing with the same old problems they've been stuck in for many years. Because that's what I do professionally now. And I'd like to share the wealth, as it were.
Absolutely. No, I think there is something very therapeutic about creativity. And, I find that I like going for a run. Well, no, I rephrase it. I don't like going for a run. But I like going for a run because that's when I come up with my ideas, because, the story is a jigsaw and you go, that was the missing piece. And it's not really about the running. It's about just having that headspace. And there's nothing really more mindful than thinking of storylines or thinking of endings or whatever, developing characters. And the running bit's awful, but
the running is tough. But that moment where you come up and you finally answer the question, oh, that's what was missing.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest feelings I know.
Absolutely.
And I know that feeling.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
And you do too, obviously.
I'm with you on that.
That's a great, great feeling.
Howard, give us the title of the book once more, will you?
Once more. So the book is Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry.
Fantastic.
And that's by Howard Scott Warshaw. And if you're looking at this, that's me on my 25th birthday, and you can see the E.T. video game is on the screen on my development system.
There you go.
So
it's a great
photo.
A
piece of history for you.
A piece of history. Howard.
Yeah, if you've enjoyed this interview, you'll love this book. I guarantee you. I'm going
to go straight onto Audible now and get it on download. And that will be when the kids are doing their gymnastics and swimming tomorrow, I'll be there with my audio book and I'll give it a listen, because like I say, I love the documentary. I've loved this chat. As you could probably tell, I've not had a smile. I've had my smile on my face for the last hour talking to you. It's been fabulous. So thank you so much for giving up your time. And
Lee, you're so welcome. I'm sorry I'm short on time now, but I would be happy to come chat again if you'd like to. There's always plenty more to talk about.
Let's do that because, like you say, we didn't actually really talk much about the second part, but fascinating. Let's do that. We'll keep in touch and we'll have you on again.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Take care.
Right.
Much
Take care.
appreciated.
Thanks, Howard. How good was that? Love chatting to Howard. What a fascinating guy. Brought back my gaming days from the Commodore 64 and all those pioneering games. And yes, I have subsequently spoken to him and realised that we should probably get him on to talk about some psychology as well. He is the Silicon Valley therapist after all. And we are a mental health podcast, allegedly. So maybe get him on for a bit of that. But until then, no episode next week. So you've got a couple of weeks to catch up on any old episodes you haven't listened to yet. So no episode next week, but we will have the Mind Cake Christmas party on Christmas Eve. And of course, you're all invited. And then we're off for a couple more weeks back in the new year. So look after yourselves, be kind to yourself, and get yourself some cake. Thanks for listening. Take care. See you soon.
Let's start a podcast about our mental health for no good reason why. Let's call it